The boardroom was suffocating, the air thick with tension. Evelyn's hands trembled as her manager, Mr. Harris, delivered the final blow. His voice was cold, accusing her of incompetence, something she had dreaded for years. The words stung, but they weren't unfamiliar. She had been passed over before, ignored, made to feel like she was invisible. This time, however, she wouldn't remain silent. The weight of his judgment threatened to crush her, yet something inside her stirred. Her heart pounded and her breath quickened, but she forced herself to remain steady. She had to speak, to stand up for herself. The world around her blurred as her mind raced, unsure of how to respond. Would she defend herself, or let this moment define her? The seconds stretched, suffocating. Then with a sharp breath she found her voice. Evelyn stood alone in the hallway, her heart still pounding from the confrontation. Her mind raced, replaying every word, every glance. She had said something, finally. But now, doubt crept in. What if it hadn't been enough? What if she had overstepped, damaged any chance of redemption? She could hear the echo of Mr. Harris' voice in her head, his harsh words echoing like a drum. But as she stood there, something shifted. The adrenaline slowly faded, and what was left was clarity. She had spoken her truth. It was no longer about gaining approval or avoiding failure. It was about asserting herself, claiming her place in the room, no matter the consequences. For the first time, she didn't feel like the outsider. She felt seen, and that was enough. Evelyn walked to her desk, the weight of her thoughts pressing heavily on her. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but the words wouldn't come. The screen in front of her flickered, the email she had been working on now, an afterthought. She tried to focus, but her mind was elsewhere. There was a knock at the door. Without looking up, she knew who it was. It was Jake, her colleague, the one person she trusted, but even then their relationship had always been surface level. He didn't know the real her, the one that had been suffocating in silence for years. But now, as he stepped into her office, she felt something stir. For the first time in a long while, she wanted to open up, to share. Maybe, just maybe, this was the moment to take a leap. Jake leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her quietly. "You all right?" His voice was soft, but there was an edge to it. He knew she'd been through something earlier, but he didn't know the detail. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stared at the blank email on her screen, as if trying to find the right words to explain. How could she put into words the weight of the moment, the decision she had made to finally stand up for herself? She took a deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs, and for a brief moment felt a sense of peace. I said something," she finally whispered, her voice betraying her vulnerability. Jake raised an eyebrow but stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He could see the internal struggle in her eyes. "That's good," he said, his tone encouraging but with a subtle hint of skepticism. "But, is it enough?" Evelyn and Jake sat in silence for a few moments. The only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the office. Evelyn could feel the weight of his gaze, but she didn't look up. She didn't want him to see the doubt in her eyes. But it was there, creeping into her thoughts. What if everything she'd done up to this point was for nothing? Jake broke the silence first, his voice gruff yet gentle. "I've seen you, Evelyn, not the version you've been showing everyone, but the real you. You've always had it in you." Her breath caught at his words. She hadn't expected him to say that. She had always thought he saw her as just another colleague, just another person trying to make it through the day. But now, his words sank in, and for the first time, she felt truly seen. "It's not over," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. The words held a promise, one that she wasn't sure she could keep, but she would try. Evelyn woke early, the soft morning light streaming through her window. Today was different. She had decided to take control of her own story. The silence from yesterday's confrontation no longer felt like defeat, but a turning point. She would no longer shrink back into the shadows. She took a deep breath, her eyes focusing on the reflection in the mirror. She saw strength now, where once there was fear. This wasn't just about her work, it was about reclaiming her life. With resolve, she stepped out, ready to confront her future. By mid-morning, Evelyn walked into the office with a different air about her. She no longer felt the need to blend in. As she entered the conference room, she noticed the familiar faces, but something was different. She could see their eyes on her, not with judgment, but curiosity. She was no longer invisible. As the meeting began, Evelyn spoke with confidence, offering her thoughts clearly, unafraid of criticism. The weight she had carried for so long seemed lighter now, as if she had finally stepped into her own power. After the meeting, Evelyn's colleague Jake caught up with her, a smirk on his face. "That was different," he said, raising an eyebrow. Evelyn met his gaze, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Different in a good way, I hope." Jake gave a short chuckle, then nodded. "You weren't holding back. It's about time." Evelyn felt a warmth spread through her at his words, but the excitement was tempered with the lingering knowledge that her journey was only beginning. She had taken the first step, but there was still much more to prove. As the day wore on, Evelyn found herself standing at her desk, looking out the window. The city below seemed so vast, yet for the first time, it didn't feel overwhelming. She realized that she had spent so much of her life trying to avoid conflict, to stay in the background, thinking it would keep her safe. But now, she understood that silence wasn't safety, it was stagnation. The sun dipped low, and the room grew warmer. She had taken control today, but there would be more challenges ahead. She wasn't done yet. Later that evening, Evelyn met her friend for coffee. The small cafe had a warm, cozy atmosphere, with soft lighting and the rich scent of coffee filling the air. As they talked, she shared the events of the day, including her newfound resolve. Her friend listened intently, nodding in understanding. "You've always been capable of more than you think," they said, their voice gentle but firm. Evelyn's heart swelled with gratitude. She had always sought approval, but now she realized she didn't need it. She had everything she needed within herself. Evelyn sat in her office, staring blankly at her computer screen. Her thoughts felt like a whirlwind. Everything she had worked for now seemed to crumble before her eyes. Mr. Harris had found another issue with her report, and the emails from the team were filled with criticism. She felt as though the walls were closing in. She had tried so hard to change, to be seen, but now it felt like nothing was enough. The weight of failure pressed down on her chest. She leaned back in her chair, running a hand through her hair, trying to breathe, but the doubt kept creeping in. Was it even worth it? The tension in Evelyn's chest only grew as the day passed. She couldn't focus. Her mind kept replaying the moments of the meeting where Mr. Harris had called her work subpar in front of everyone. It felt like a public humiliation, a failure she couldn't escape. She had tried so hard to prove herself to be seen as capable, but instead it felt like the harder she fought, the more she was pushed back. Her phone buzzed with another message, another reminder that she wasn't enough. It was all too much. After hours of struggling with her thoughts, Evelyn decided to call her mother. The conversation felt strained, like she was waiting for the familiar judgment that she had always feared. "I knew you weren't cut out for this," her mother had said in that voice that always made Evelyn feel small. Her heart sank. Was she really that much of a disappointment? She tried to hold back the tears, but they came anyway. The years of feeling like she wasn't enough, the constant push to do better, had built up, and now, it all came crashing down. She was failing. Evelyn went for a walk to clear her head, but the city felt cold and unwelcoming. The streets were crowded, but she felt alone, lost in a sea of faces that didn't care. She watched people moving, living, while she felt as though she was standing still. Each step seemed heavier than the last. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had failed, not just her boss, not just her family, but herself. The self-doubt was suffocating. She had fought so hard to change, but maybe some things were never meant to be different. Evelyn returned home that evening, her mind heavy with the events of the day. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at her hands. The tears that had been threatening to fall finally came. It felt like everything she had worked for was slipping through her fingers, and she didn't know how to hold on. The failure seemed so final, so inescapable. But as the tears subsided, she realized something. She couldn't let this be the end. She was broken, yes, but not beyond repair. She had to find a way to pick up the pieces and rebuild herself. Evelyn woke early, the pale morning light filling her room. The events of the last few weeks had taken a toll, but something inside her had shifted. The weight of failure still lingered, but now there was a fire. The hopelessness that had overwhelmed her was now replaced with a quiet resolve. She knew she had to face the challenges head-on, not for anyone else but for herself. As she stared into the mirror, she could almost see the person she had been trying to become, a woman unafraid to take risks and embrace her power. Today would be the day she began rebuilding. It wouldn't be easy, but she had to start somewhere. The old Evelyn had been afraid of failing. The new Evelyn was ready to rise. Evelyn walked into the office with a new sense of purpose. The conversations from the previous days, the judgments, the mistakes, all of them faded into the background. She could feel the difference in the way she carried herself. As she entered the conference room, she noticed the eyes on her, but this time they didn't make her shrink. She held her head high, her gaze steady. When it was time to speak, her voice didn't waver. She addressed the issues head-on, offering solutions instead of apologies. This wasn't the same woman who had hesitated weeks ago. She was taking ownership of her role, and for the first time she felt in control of her destiny. The room was quiet as she spoke, and for once her words felt like they mattered. After the meeting, Evelyn felt an unexpected surge of confidence. Her colleague Jake approached her with a smile, something she hadn't seen from him in a while. "You did well today," he said, his voice warm but guarded. Evelyn smiled back, but there was no denying the pride that swelled in her chest. She had done it. She had faced her fears and taken control. She couldn't deny the weight that had lifted from her shoulders. Jake's acknowledgement, though brief, meant more than he knew. In that moment, Evelyn realized that the real victory wasn't the approval of others. It was her own belief in herself. She was ready for what came next. That evening, Evelyn found herself in a quiet cafe, sitting alone with a cup of tea. The city outside was alive, bustling, but in this small corner of the world, she felt at peace. She reflected on her journey so far, the struggles, the setbacks, and the triumphs. She had spent so many years trying to fit into a mold, to meet others' expectations. But now, she understood that true strength came from embracing who she was, flaws and all. The challenges weren't over, but she was no longer afraid of them. She had come to terms with her past, and that allowed her to look forward with hope. The future was hers to shape. The next morning, Evelyn stood in front of her mirror once again, but this time, there was no uncertainty. She knew who she was and what she was capable of. As she dressed for the day, she felt a sense of calm confidence wash over her. The world outside might still present challenges, but she was no longer afraid. She was ready to face them, to push through the discomfort, and to keep moving forward. As she walked out of her apartment and into the bustling city, she took a deep breath, grounded in the knowledge that she was stronger than she had ever believed. Today was the first day of the rest of her life. Evelyn sat in her office, the glow of the computer screen reflecting off her tired face. The quiet hum of the room was interrupted by a notification. She clicked the email and froze. It was from HR. A report had been filed against her, accusing her of manipulating data in her last project. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Evelyn couldn't believe it. She had worked tirelessly on that report, done everything by the book. But someone was targeting her, and she didn't know why. Her mind raced as the implications sank in. Could this be another attempt to undermine her progress? She thought she had finally overcome the obstacles, but now, it seemed, the past was catching up with her. She had to act quickly, but the question lingered. Who could she trust? Evelyn stood in front of the mirror, her reflection barely visible through the fog of doubt clouding her mind. She couldn't fathom who would accuse her of something so serious, especially when she had worked so hard to prove herself. As she looked at her reflection, a new emotion surfaced. Anger. She wasn't going to let this accusation define her. She had already overcome so much, and she wasn't going to let anyone destroy the progress she had made. She took a deep breath, her fingers brushing her lips as she made a decision. She would confront this head-on, find out who was behind this, and expose the truth. This wasn't the end. It was another challenge she had to rise to meet. Evelyn's heart raced as she sat in the meeting room, with Mr. Harris and a few other senior managers. They went over the accusations methodically, each word a heavy blow to her reputation. She tried to remain composed, but her mind was spinning. She had never felt so exposed. The feeling of being unjustly accused was a new experience for her, and it shook her to her core. "You need to prove that these allegations are false," Mr. Harris said flatly, offering no empathy. Evelyn's stomach churned as she tried to gather the evidence she needed. She had to clear her name, but more than that, she had to uncover the motive behind this attack. Who had filed the complaint, and why now? Evelyn spent the next few days digging through emails, reports, and every piece of evidence she could find to clear her name. The office felt like a battlefield, every conversation laced with suspicion. She felt the walls closing in once more. But as she sifted through an old report, she stumbled upon something unexpected. An email chain that implicated one of her colleagues. It wasn't just a random accusation, it was calculated. Someone had deliberately planted false data to frame her. Evelyn's blood ran cold as the realization hit. The person behind this was someone she had trusted, someone close. Now, the challenge wasn't just to clear her name, it was to expose the truth without losing everything. Evelyn sat in her office, staring at the phone in her hand. The conversation with Jake had left her conflicted. He knew something was off, and he had his suspicions. "You can't trust anyone right now," he had warned. But Evelyn was torn. She had always believed in the goodness of her colleagues, but now, she wasn't sure who was on her side. Her mind raced as she prepared for the next step, confronting the person behind the scheme. She didn't know what the consequences would be, but she knew she couldn't back down. This was her fight, and she would fight for the truth, even if it meant risking everything. Evelyn stood at the front of the conference room, her hands trembling slightly, though she kept her composure. The final presentation was today, and everything rested on this. She had spent weeks perfecting the report, and it wasn't just about the data. It was about her reputation, her growth. She could feel the weight of her earlier struggles, but now it was different. She wasn't the woman who had been scared of failure. She had fought through betrayal, self-doubt, and setbacks. Now, it was time to face the truth. The last hurdle. She adjusted her glasses, lifted her chin, and began speaking. Every word felt like a declaration, not just to the room, but to herself. This was her moment. As she moved through the presentation, Evelyn could feel the tension in the room. Her colleagues were silent, their eyes on the screen, but it was the unspoken weight of judgment that loomed over her. She had learned to push through that pressure, but it was harder now. The accusations had left their mark. She paused for a moment, collecting herself before continuing. It wasn't just the data that she needed to convince them of. It was her integrity. She had always thought that hard work would speak for itself, but now she knew that she had to prove it. This wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing them that she was capable, despite everything. Evelyn clicked to the final slide, feeling the weight of the moment. As she spoke about the data, she could see the skepticism in the room, but she pressed on. This was her truth. There was no turning back now. Her voice was steady as she explained the nuances of her work, her insights, and the importance of the conclusions she had drawn. But then, just as she finished, a question was asked, a challenging question that threatened to unravel her carefully constructed presentation. The room seemed to hold its breath. She wasn't expecting this, but she knew she had to answer. With a deep breath, Evelyn focused on the question, ready to fight back. She wasn't going to let anyone undermine her again. Evelyn felt her pulse race as she answered, her mind working quickly. She had been prepared for tough questions, but this one cut deeper than expected. The accusation seemed small, just a minor inconsistency, but it threatened to shake everything she had built. But Evelyn wasn't going to let it slide. She clarified the misunderstanding, pointing out the exact data and showing the context that had been overlooked. With each word, she could feel the weight lifting off her shoulders. As the questioning subsided, a quiet sense of victory settled over her. She had held her ground. She had proven herself. This was no longer about the presentation. It was about her reclaiming her confidence and strength. As the meeting adjourned, Evelyn stood up, feeling a surge of pride. The challenge wasn't over, but she had faced it head-on. She had shown them who she really was, someone who could stand tall despite the odds. As she walked out of the room, she was approached by Jake, his eyes filled with approval. "You did it," he said with a grin. Evelyn smiled back, but there was a deeper satisfaction in her chest. It wasn't just about winning this battle. It was about reclaiming herself, standing firm in her own truth. And for the first time in a long while, Evelyn believed that she could face whatever came next. Evelyn sat in her apartment, looking out at the city skyline. It was late evening, and the streets below were bathed in golden light, bustling with life. She felt at peace. It had taken time, but she had finally come to terms with everything: the setbacks, the betrayals, the doubts. They no longer controlled her. She had learned that real strength didn't come from avoiding failure, but from facing it head-on. Evelyn had reclaimed herself, not just in her career, but in every part of her life. She had found her voice, her confidence, and her worth. As she gazed out the window, a soft smile spread across her face. She had won. Not because of the triumphs, but because she had never given up. This was just the beginning. The next day, Evelyn walked into the office with an unshakable calm. As she passed by her colleagues, she felt no fear, no insecurity. Her journey had shaped her, but it had also made her strong. The woman who had once feared judgment was now standing tall. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone. She had already done that. Today she was stepping into a new role, one that she had earned, not through appeasing others, but through believing in her own abilities. As she sat down at her desk, she felt a new sense of purpose. She wasn't just working for approval anymore. She was working for herself. Later that day, Evelyn was called into a meeting with her manager. As she sat across from him, she could see the look of admiration in his eyes. "You've really turned things around, Evelyn," he said. She nodded, the words feeling like the validation she had once craved. But this time, it wasn't about seeking approval. It was about recognizing her own worth. She had proved herself, not because of external praise, but because she had stayed true to who she was. It was a moment of reflection, a reminder that her journey had led her here. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady and strong. Evelyn spent the evening reflecting on everything she had achieved. She was no longer the woman who sought approval at every turn. She had learned to trust herself, to know her worth without needing others to tell her. Her journey had been long, but it had shaped her into someone she was proud to be. She had broken free from the chains of fear and doubt. Now, she looked ahead to the future with hope and confidence. The path ahead was still uncertain, but she was ready for whatever came next. She knew she would rise to meet it, just as she had before. The following week, Evelyn stood before a group of new hires, ready to lead them with the wisdom she had gained. As she spoke, she realized just how far she had come. She wasn't just teaching them the basics of the job, she was imparting something much deeper. She was showing them how to overcome obstacles, how to believe in themselves even when the world told them they weren't enough. She was teaching them what she had learned through her own struggles: resilience, courage, and the power of never giving up. This was her legacy. Not just the work she had done, but the people she had inspired along the way.